if in a case of a company like MicroStrategy, where Michael Saylor says he's going to hold it forever, it's actually irrelevant because you're never going to crystallize your loss unless you sell it. But for new companies that have to report to shareholders that they're putting this risky, in their terms, risky asset on the books, what if your quarter is destroyed because you have to mark down the holding of a Bitcoin, which is a long-term asset marked to short-term? Well, let's be honest. The banks are exactly the opposite of that. The banks never mark down their holdings. Let's talk about the number first, which probably came in as expected. They were saying somewhere between 8 and 8.3. The problem is the core. Okay, so the core inflation was
6.6.
Higher than they wanted. Stocks are down, risk assets are off. Mortgage rates in the US, 6.92%. I just glanced at that. It's ugly. And it's exactly what we thought was going to happen, right? So bonds, US 10-year bonds are down. Yields are higher. We have a problem. Houston, we have a problem. Love that word, counterparty risk, okay? So my experience in the great financial crisis was exactly that. Everybody scrambles to find what their exposure to Bear Stearns was. These are interbank basically exposures that, you never assume that one of these big institutions can go down, and then all of a sudden, hey, what is my real exposure to Bear? What's my real exposure to Lehman? Well, we're seeing that right now. What's my real exposure to Credit Suisse? Counterparty risk is what brings down the system, because when one fails, it causes a domino effect, right? You think you have insurance with this insurance provider, and all of a sudden you don't, and then you're naked on your position. That's why in the great financial crisis, they rescued AIG, because if they didn't rescue AIG, Goldman Sachs was down. Okay, so isn't it funny that Hank Paulson, who used to work at Goldman Sachs, organized the rescue of AIG. Right? So all of these intertwined things, what you need to remember when it comes back, Bitcoin, which we all love, has no counterparty risk. That's why it's such a beautiful instrument. You haven't purchased insurance from anybody. It is insurance, in my opinion, but it's not like it's outstanding with any company that can fail. So having spent my career in the credit markets, I see things unraveling. It's slowly, but suddenly. Well, right now, it's not zombie companies we need to worry about, Nat. It's zombie banks, like a big bank like Credit Suisse or Deutsche Bank, that kicks one last thing uphill. Imagine if Deutsche Bank fails, it has to be nationalized by Germany, and all of a sudden Germany isn't the sugar daddy of the EU anymore.
Yep.
I don't know. Not a zero probability, said zombie company. So the definition of a zombie company is any corporation that can only cover, its interest expense one time or less, okay? Meaning its EBITDA or its pre-tax cash flow only meets interest obligations one time. And that's about a CCC rated company. Conversely, a AAA rated company can cover its interest expense 10 times. Mm-hmm. So you can see when you can cover your interest expense 10 times, well, that's a pretty good quality credit. But if you're at 1 times, you're playing with fire. Yeah. Guess what the USA is? 1 times. So if the USA were rated as a corporation, CCC, that's not a good thing. No. Now, they can print money, but you got to compare apples to apples at some point. They cannot not print, okay? They're saying they're going to try QT, but the error term right now in the debt spiral that they are in right now is to print money. There's no other way out. So they're going to pretend they're not going to print, but I'm afraid the math is they have to print. The question is, when do they pivot from their inflation fighting, even targeting inflation from, they currently have a 2% annualized inflation, and they're targeting Fed funds to go to 4.5% to 5%. It's only at 3.25% Fed funds, and everything is breaking already. Yeah. I saw a graph where the 1%, the percentage ownership in the world of assets by the 1% versus the 99%. Mm-hmm. We are getting to a point where the 1% of the world owns more assets than the other 99%.
Yeah.
You have
It's
that in your
just
book.
crushed. This is the most nervous I've been since the great financial crisis, when I sat in a risk chair and honestly saw the financial world collapsing. The same smoldering of the financial plumbing is existing. So on the one hand, you have the potential for nuclear war, nuclear collapse. On the other hand, we have real risks for financial collapse, both of which we hope don't happen. Let's be clear. But the probabilities, i.e. the risks, are increasing. You need to protect yourself against that. So when I worked on the trading desk, one of our taglines was risk happens fast, okay? Risk happens fast. I'm going to warn you. Risk is happening faster than it ever has right now. So risk is actually happening faster because of all the previous risks that have been kicked up to the highest level, makes risk happen faster. The world's a riskier place, I'm afraid, because of the system we have lived in that continually socialized losses and pushed the responsibility to the highest level. Because the billionaires still have exposure. That being said, some of them are great traders. Most of them probably still have the same exposure. I'm going to let Jeff answer this, but you asked the question, perhaps rhetorically. I can't explain it. I absolutely can't explain it. It was a short-term solution. They printed $9 trillion globally.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden they're turning off all the taps and pretending they weren't the cause of this problem. And get the Nobel Prize.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So, I can't say it any other way, but this is absolute clown world central, where they go around patting each other on the back. Great job, Ben. Great job. You were the original helicopter Ben. You made this policy, and now we're giving you the Nobel Prize?
Yeah.
I'm not saying this, but there's a guy named Cuppy who's a great follow, a hedge fund guy. I know who he is, friend of Mark Moss's. All right, I don't want to dox him too badly. He said Bernanke should be in prison. I'm not saying that. I am saying that. I will vouch for the same thing. This is criminal behavior that is disgraceful for my children. Happen faster, but let's do the math for the whole world. Everyone says, how long can it go for the U.S.? Okay, I agree it can go more for the U.S., but it's the periphery nations that will fall down once. Because again, if you take the world as one system, the total debt of the world is 400 trillion versus GDP, which is 100 trillion. If you look at the whole world, all right, it's very simple. There will be catastrophes because of that math of the whole world. Can the USA still do it? Most likely. They will be the last. They're the best looking horse at the glue factory. But that's all they are, the best looking horse at the glue factory. You're lucky. The United States is a great country, all right? The reason it's not going to happen in Canada is because we just don't have the freedom anymore that the USA has. At least you guys have a constitution where freedom of speech is still, the First Amendment, right? And that's what you need, and that's Bitcoin. And the two things, in my opinion, dovetail nicely. But that being said, the USA is the bastion of capitalism still in the world. They know the risk. There's enough smart people. But it won't. Unfortunately, it won't be Canada because we just don't have the global heft. What we do have are people like Jeff that are trying to educate. Luckily, we meet great people at meetups like this in Amsterdam that take little pieces home. Mm-hmm. Once it happens, though, it'll be a game of, it'll be game theory. Just look at what's happening in Central America with El Salvador. Those numbers are so exciting. If El Salvador had equity, they don't, but if they did, I'd be a huge buyer of the equity of El Salvador. But strangely enough, Jeff and I talked in the past about buying the bonds of El Salvador. Effectively, the equity of El Salvador, we would have loved to have bought those bonds and know that we would get 100 cents on the dollar back. But then Bukele came in and scooped up a bunch of bonds. Brilliant financial risk management in the face of a world. They had their GDP grow at 10% on a $28 billion economy. That's not bad. That's $2.8 billion for the good guys. What do you hear in the press? Oh, they lost $50 million on their Bitcoin position. Excuse me. You lost $50 million, but you just put $2.8 billion on your top line revenues.
Well, and
start telling the truth, okay? So people in Central America are going to adopt it. And if we're not smart in Canada, you know what my advice is? Learn Spanish.
Well, but
what happened in the past is you had to write down as a loss your holding on Bitcoin. And you never got to write it up. You only could write it down, okay? If in a case of a company like MicroStrategy, where Michael Saylor says he's going to hold it forever, It's actually irrelevant because, you're never going to crystallize your loss unless you sell it. But for new companies that have to report to shareholders that they're putting this risky, in their terms, risky asset on the books, what if your quarter is destroyed because you have to mark down the holding of a Bitcoin, which is a long-term asset marked to short-term? Well, let's be honest. The banks are exactly the opposite of that. The banks never mark down their holdings unless there's a default on the loans. If it hasn't defaulted, they keep it at 100 cents on the dollar. So I think it's fairer, more fair accounting. I think it'll make it easier for other companies. So as soon as Jeff said, he said, as soon as it happens to you, then you will realize. As long as it's happening to other people, it's fine. So, be careful, people, because this is the censorship that is very dangerous, and you have to nip it in the bud. So I agree. So it's just a great community. A shout out to the young kids that I've learned so much from. Like a Dylan LeClaire, like you, Natalie. I often say, if I'm the smartest guy in a room, we better find another room. And so let's make sure that we continue to meet young people, help them be the future leaders. We need more voices like yours. I just met at this trip Amanda Cavallari, just a wonderful person that I said to her when we were walking to this, I go, I feel like I've known you my whole life, and yet we literally met each other 2 days ago, right? And so I don't know what attracts these people with the same moral code and everything, but it's not Wall Street, I promise you that. Having spent my life on Wall Street, 99% of Wall Street are takers, okay? The flip side is at least 85% of the Bitcoin community are givers, and I'd rather be part of the giving community. I've come to meet both of you guys who I consider close friends right now, right? And but I'm not doing it because I want to be close friends. Like, I love being close friends with you guys. I'm doing it because I have 3 kids that really are in a bad spot if we don't fight for the future. Young kids out there, invest in the future by meeting us on common ground to say, we might not be right, but we're just trying to do the right thing. So do well by doing good. It's a great way to live your life. Like, oh my God, like I'm.
Why aren't you doing this, son?
But I'm so lucky to have friends that are like my son's age, right? And that being said, I have lots of my son's friends who I'd like to think are friends of mine as well. But this is new friends from the Bitcoin community, all working in the same direction. There's a friend in the back here, Jack, that honest to God, he's going to help change the world. And this is what I really am excited about.